I'd like to start. Please be seated. Okay, once again, good evening. My name is Yeshayahu, and I'm the Chief Scientist at the Ministry of the Environment, and I'm very happy to be here tonight with you. I think it's a very significant event, and I'd like to congratulate the Porter School for organizing this important event. I'd like to say just very few short words about what we in the Ministry of the Environment are doing with respect to global warming, and it covers two areas. One of them is within our commitment to the Kyoto Protocol is trying to reduce as much as possible on a voluntary basis, because we don't have to. In the framework of the Kyoto Protocol, Israel does not have an obligation to reduce greenhouse gases, but rather it does so on a voluntary basis, and it is also involved in several projects to reduce emissions within the CDM mechanism, the Clean Development Mechanism, in which European countries can buy credits by investing in Israel in projects to reduce gas emissions. That's one thing. The other thing, which is more relevant to the topic of this workshop, is trying to realize that we are very much within the process of global warming on one hand and local changes in climate on the other hand. Here in Israel, I think the public is pretty much aware of these phenomena, and if we recognize that we are at the middle of this process, and recognizing that Israel, after all, is a very insignificant contributor to greenhouse gases, we need to try to see how we cope with it, or if you like, we adapt to it. Therefore, we have been conducting for the last 2 years a research program aimed at mapping the impacts of climate changes and trying to start an adaptation program. Our minister, who regrets he was not able to participate here, has submitted to the government a proposal to prepare a national plan for what I said, mapping and adapting or coping with the climate changes here in Israel, as related to many diverse fields, biodiversity on one hand, transportation, floods, flood control, whatever, even tourism. And I must say, and with this I'll conclude my prelude, that there are, beside the risks, there are certain opportunities for Israel as well, because we have been coping with very tight conditions of very short water supplies, and living in the semi-arid conditions and agriculture at the shadow of the desert, and management of forest fires. We've been living with this for 50 years or more. I think, and I hear pretty much about it, that Israel is very much esteemed in the global community for its efforts and its successes in managing water under duress. So therefore, I think we can gain, by virtue of with all due humility, trying to teach the world some lessons we have gained over the last 40 years or 50 years. And by the way, we can also market technologies developed in Israel. And it does not only relate to water, it can relate very well to other fields as well. With this, I'd like to open the second session on politics, economics, and the media with the presentation of Professor Rabinowitz from the Department of Sociology and Anthropology on global warming as a non-linear process, implications for public awareness and environmental politics.
Good evening, everyone. I've decided you've worked hard enough this afternoon, so I'm not going to use a PowerPoint presentation. Relieve you of that for a while. I'm a social anthropologist, which is why my paper here will touch on geophysics, climatology, paleogeography, glaciology, statistics, risk assessment, insurance practices, global financial markets, and many other things I'm absolutely not qualified or an expert on. On a more serious note, I've been preoccupied for a while with human perceptions and sensibilities about global warming, what Max Weber would have called the social facts, in this case the social facts of global warming. The way human sensibilities, more or less sensible, more or less rational, become in and of themselves determining factors in reality out there. We now know beyond a shadow of a doubt that global warming is upon us, that it is an anthropogenic phenomena that is man-made, and that countermeasures on the part of humanity are imperative if the survival of our civilization as we know it is to be secured. Now, these premises immediately catapult us into two theaters of operation. One is the urgent struggle for awareness of the realities and the risks of global warming. The other, on which I will not dwell for very long this evening, is the need to forge some kind of global political will for cooperation in an attempt to reverse the trend. On political will, I will only touch very briefly and say that the crux of the challenge as I see it is that while it is true that global warming threatens humanity at large, it is also true that those living in poorer countries with weaker infrastructures and with less access to the technology and the finance that would enable them to help anticipate and ameliorate the problem will be the ones impacted more. In other words, equality is not there when we're talking about victimhood. And put plainly, the internal divisions and conflicts, both within countries and between countries, are already making the political cooperation on global warming very, very difficult. And I think that the difficulties around Kyoto and the failure in recruiting the US, China, and Australia are the best example, a very worrying example of this. So issues of local and international solidarity, equity, trust, cooperation, and governance will play a major role in this political attempt. And all of them, of course, resonate of fundamentally important moral issues, including at certain junctions who will live and who will die. So this is a real challenge, including for the social sciences and the humanities. But as I said, my main concern here is with the struggle for awareness. It is a struggle which is already underway, and in many ways the way it is concluded will anticipate and will shape the outcomes of whatever policies and politics of the countermeasures are decided, and whatever the species, the human species, can come up with as willing and able to do to put it into effect. Now, awareness. Global warming for years has been a public relations nightmare. True, it is bad news, which is always good for publicity, bad news. But it is abstract, slow, invisible, excruciatingly remote, and hence very often very boring bad news. It may be very important, even crucial, a matter of life and death for drowning polar bears, or for those who plan a trip to the North Pole and want to do it in summer and want to stand on firm ice when they eventually find the North Pole. And it is fascinating for rugged researchers who drill ice cylinders in Greenland. And it is very exciting for bearded marine biologists who are combing the bottom of the ocean for ancient evidence of bygone epochs. But why should a rise in 3 degrees in average over a century excite me when I experience temperature rise of 8 to 10 degrees centigrade between breakfast and lunch? every day. When I sometimes hop on a plane here in January, go to Moscow, and experience a change of 30 or 40 degrees within a few hours. Why should I be interested in this abstraction, which may have an effect on my grandchildren, when so many other problems, much more acute and much more tangible and threatening, are on the agenda all the time? Of course, there are other reasons why the acuteness of global warming has failed to register, including the callous manipulation of scientific information done by those who stand to gain by the current carbon regime, especially the oil, energy, and transport sectors in various countries in the West. But one reason which is especially relevant to me here has to do with the perceived nature of global warming as a linear process. In other words, one which develops at a steady state, steady rate. The accumulation of CO2 in the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution has been gradual. The way we plot temperatures and temperature measurements on charts is incremental. The models that we use for the calibration of millions of cases of various types of data that go into calculations of global warming over time must, if they want to be rendered accurate and meaningful and scientific, must make and project in the end a linear progression. We think of the world by grouping it into discrete, incremental sets of information. Our past is linear. Perhaps teleologically, this is the way we are conditioned to calculate and plan the future. So global warming, almost you might say in a deterministic kind of way, has been constructed as an inherently gradual, slow process. The big scientific debate right now is really about its speed and its limits. Certain assumptions will cause a model to show a steeper curve, others will keep it shallower, but all of them assume linear progression. We can, of course, think of jumps in future temperatures, but it will always be speculative. It could or could not happen. Our powers of prediction for such jumps, future jumps, are limited. They are much weaker than the legitimacy of identifying ourselves in the middle of a linear progression which developed as it did in the past and therefore can be assumed to do the same in future. Ice melts slowly, we know that. So we assume that if the globe gets warmer, the thousands of meters of Greenland, for example, or Antarctica will simply melt from the top down over decades, maybe longer. And the 7 meters of rise in ocean level, which is likely if Greenland or parts of Greenland melts away, will come gradually. In other words, we have time. We are a little bit like the guy in the famous Jewish joke who takes the loan from the poritz and knows that he cannot pay it back. And his friend tells him, "You're crazy. The poritz is going to sue you in his Polish court and rip you apart." And he says, "No, I'm so poor that the poritz will have no reason to do anything to me. And the court won't bother." So his friend says, "Yes, but then he'll send his great big black dog after you." So the Jewish guy says, "Don't worry, I have a plan for that. By the time my debt is up for payment, either the dog will die, or the poritz will go away, or I will become rich." And meanwhile, I have had other things that are much more pressing to worry about. Now, if we anticipate global warming to be linear, then the assumption goes, even if it does go slightly faster, science would still have enough time and opportunity to bail us out. Humanity will have enough time to get its act together, find behavioral, technological, and political solutions, and implement them before it is too late. Haven't we done it before, after all? We've done it with antibiotics. We've done it with the ozone hole. We've done it with polio. The guys in Hollywood always do it. You know, they always find the good guy that gets it right and drives evil away before it can manage to exterminate all of us. Well, we may be able to do that, but what if we don't? Perhaps it is better, we are better off learning from another Jewish joke, which you may have heard. Do you know what a Jewish telegram reads like? Start worrying, details will follow. So here are some details for you. And they all have to do with new scientific data, some of which you've already heard here, that suggest that because of feedback mechanisms, global warming could lose the graceful linear character that we unwarrantedly attribute to it, and it could have indeed leaps and bounds. And I think you don't need to be a biologist to realize how devastating sudden and dramatic climatic changes can be to life on Earth. It is enough to be an insurance analyst or a director of an investment house, a point I will return to in a minute. So feedback mechanisms, you may have heard about them before and even today, are processes that are caused by global warming, but at the same time contribute to it further, thus accelerating the process even more. And there are some well-known examples, or they are beginning to become well-known. Only last week, the journal Geophysical Research Letters published the result of a study done at the Atmospheric Research Center in the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado, that anticipates that within 40 years there will be no summer ice in the North Pole. And in fact, this will start only 2025 and will go very quickly in 20 years. It doesn't raise ocean levels because this is submerged ice. It's not on top of land. But it does have other impacts. Polar ice is a giant reflector of sunlight in summer. 90% of the sunlight goes back into the atmosphere without becoming ultraviolet, and therefore does not contribute to the heat of the globe. But if that becomes water, an ocean, then the balance is reversed, and 90% of the energy, and this is the time when the North Pole, the North Hemisphere, gets most sunlight, does go into the water. When areas become desert, they have less vegetation, and therefore their ability to absorb energy and to sequester CO2 goes down, another feedback mechanism. Global warming is already melting the permafrost. This has been mentioned before here, and a large amount of methane, which is a greenhouse gas, is being emitted, another feedback mechanism. And perhaps most worrying is this. Within 35 days in 2004, chunks of the Hansen B glacier in Antarctica, the size of Maine, collapsed into the sea. Now, glaciologists were astounded. They never anticipated that this could happen so quickly. The mechanism that turned out to be in action here had to do with melted cracks in the ice sheet that go all the way down to the bedrock. The water melts down and runs down and becomes a lubricant. So in fact, that was part of the very large Hansen B glacier. Did not melt away. They slid away in one chunk into the ocean. Of course, large chunks of Antarctica sliding to the ocean could raise ocean levels by meters. In fact, if the whole of Antarctica slides down, it's 70 meters in ocean levels. It will impact the salinity in the oceans and could change sea currents, which are also heat pumps. So these are very intricate feedback mechanisms, not all of which we properly understand. But it is definitely something that we have to be worried about. And as I say, these are pieces of research collected by scientists from a variety of disciplines. And feedback mechanisms of one sort could coincide with others. the process we all like to think as linear can easily feed into itself to become geometric or even a quantum leap. Now, the most important point I want to make here is that all this does not actually have to happen in real life out there to have a devastating impact on the economy. It is enough that a number of influential people in the finance and insurance business realize or assume or understand or admit that such dynamics are inevitable for an awareness leap with far-reaching financial implications to actually take place. I think that the nature of this new scientific finding on global warming makes such awareness leaps almost inevitable. They could come in the shape of sudden epiphanies, moments of focused, concentrated, snowballing media attention that could take days or even hours to forge new public and political consensus about the inevitability of global warming, about its magnitude, and about the staggering risks. These moments, I argue, could have in and of themselves very powerful, unsettling effects on the world's insurance and in financial markets, which are the backbones of the world's economy. These are the social facts that I referred to earlier. Consciousness, perceptions, judgments, assessments of reality, which in this case could happen well before the actual geophysical event itself. And social facts can have momentous consequences. Think of panic or a stampede in the context of a global financial market which never sleeps, 24 hours, 7 days a week. In our case, the first shock waves, that is, meaningful modifications of the economic and social reality we now know, could come before the actual rise in ocean levels that might flood parts of lower Manhattan, Amsterdam, San Francisco, Shanghai, or the fields of Bangladesh. They might happen if, to use another example, forecasts begin accumulating which predict recurring droughts and leading to failure of staple commodities like the US cereals, which feed more than half the world's. There are new predictions about the connection between global warming and geopolitical instability. A study commissioned by the Pentagon in 2001 predicts that global warming could become the #1 cause for geopolitical unrest and military conflicts in the 21st century. Okay. Maybe if we have time in the questions, I could say a few things about what the insurance and finance sectors are already doing. I would just say that they are doing too little, and they are, in a way, they are in a fix, because admitting the magnitude of the problem that lies ahead could bring down the house on them. And this puts all of us, I think, in a very perilous situation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot. And our next lecturer, next speaker will be Professor Mordechai Shechter, also known as Moti Shechter, of the Department of Economics at the Haifa University. We'll be talking about the economics of climate change, a tale of two-edged sword. The floor is yours.
Can you hear me without the microphone? Yes. Okay. Okay. Who said that? By the way, first, where's? Oh, it's here. Okay. Who said that only taxi drivers are a good gauge of what the local agenda? When you come to a new city as a tourist, you have to record it. Okay. So I hate this. Okay. You hop into a taxi and you start talking with the taxi driver, and he tells you what's going on, and you get a sense of what's important, what's going on, what's the agenda, and so on and so forth. So I believe that also building porters could serve the same function or the same purpose. Now, the other day, Pinchas Halpert here and Danya Kier from Weizmann, we went to see the chief scientist of the Ministry of Science regarding this GLOA project that was referred to before, about the future of the project. It's in Tel Aviv on the 7th floor. We entered the building, and the porter there, the building porter, didn't know anything, who we were or what. But he asked, where do you want to go? And I said, to the science ministry. And he said, please, do whatever you can to save us from the impact of climate change. I'm afraid of what's going to happen to me. Now, if building porters start thinking about it, Yeshayahu, we have hope. Now, Eli asked me to provide you with a sexy title, so I came out with this thing of a two-edged sword. This is, I first gave you the title, then I thought about it. It's true, because as you have heard today, it is a two-edged sword. Because if we try to mitigate the impact of climate change, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, this is going to be a very costly affair. Now, if we don't do anything, the impact of climate change will get back to us, as was very amply presented today. So it's a two-edged sword. And here's where the economists come in, because our expertise is in optimizing. The two options are not very good. Both of them are expensive, both of them are going to be costly, and all of them are going to involve reduction in standard of living, quality of life, etc., etc. We have to find the golden path, the golden ground. So I will talk about this issue first and try to provide you with some numbers which are coming up as we go along. But then I want to make an exception. Because when we come to Israel, Yeshayahu, and speakers were talking about it, and I want to echo what they said, that we have to do something. We should act. Now, there is very little that we as Israelis can do in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions because we don't contribute much. But there is very much we can do and should do, and we haven't done enough, and we haven't paid attention enough in order to save our own house from the perils of climate change if and when it happens. So, and then Benayahu, where is Professor Benayahu? I'm the old man here, out here. I'm from the University of Haifa, not from Tel Aviv University. So I must say that probably this is the last time you will invite me over here. The Porter School is doing a great job. No question about it. Unique, it ain't. With our Department of Natural Resource and Environmental Management in the School of Management at the University of Haifa, we have now produced 8 graduate classes. It's a graduate department, masters and PhDs, over the past 10 years. So, and we do, this POB is similar. So we also contribute, I hope, to training people in this area. Anyhow, let's start. Controlling climate change entails, on one hand, this is the two-edged sword, substantial social costs to be borne, especially by the present generation, we, us, implying a reduction in living standards. Let's not have any qualms about it. It is going to reduce our living standards if we are going to do something. There are no free lunches here. On the other hand, it offers the promise of a better world for future generations, not us, our grandchildren and great-grandchildren and all the other generations, including the avoidance of potential environmental catastrophes, as was amply presented. Now, the consensus, as was again amply shown today, among scientists, natural scientists, based on the evidence gathering by a growing volume of scientific literature, leads to the conclusion that the benefits of strong and early, and I emphasize early, action considerably outweigh the cost. Our actions over the coming few decades could create risks of major disruption to economic and social activity later in this century and in the next, as was shown again, on a scale similar to those associated with the Great Wars and the economic depression of the first half of the 20th century. We forget, but we are going to face, we may, again, as the scientific evidence shows, something akin to the kind of catastrophes we went through during the first half of the 20th century. In addition to that, as was shown again and again today and repeatedly, this is the we tend many a times to treat, how does it work? Well, whatever. Anyhow, we tend to treat the processes as smooth, either the blue or the green line. I would not go into it. Although, again and again, it was emphasized today that sometimes we face nonlinearities and disruptive processes that we are not able to foresee. Here, we can at least foresee what's going on in the future. Here, we have very little information about it. And so, economic losses associated with extreme events increased tenfold in real terms between the 50s and the 90s of the last century. This is from the IPCC, the third assessment report. And we have to remember that because this is over and above all the other costs. And it will be difficult or impossible to reverse these changes. Tackling climate change can be done in a way that doesn't cap the aspirations of growth of the rich or poor countries. The earlier effective action is taken, the less costly it will be. And continuing to adapt in the future. And the big question is, will humanity have the will and perseverance to make the difficult choices for the sake of future generations? Now, I'll give you a schematic idea where do the economists stand in this whole story. So we have the greenhouse gas emissions, we have climate models, a lot was said about it. We have ecosystem models, Marcelo talked about it. And then we have the impacts, which again, many people repeated. And from here, we go into the economic model. And of course, economy also, in a way, impacts the ecosystems and have its own impacts. What I am concentrating in this part of the lecture, you heard about the other things earlier today, is those impacts and how they find expression in the economy. So this is our roadmap. As you know, in order to compare eggs and apples, we have to put them on the common denominator. And what economists do is monetizing. There is a lot of controversy, and I will not go into it. But the idea is in order to compare benefits and cost, we have to put it on common grounds. And the common grounds, in this case, dollars or whatever currency. So what are the different elements in our calculations? The cost or the benefits for reducing damages to natural and production systems. We have the cost associated with adaptation, again, I will come to it, to new climate regimes to alleviate expected damages. We have the cost of prevention. This is mitigation. This is Kyoto, associated with greenhouse gas reductions. We have costs associated with uncertainty. There is a lot of uncertainty, and it is very difficult to quantify these costs. We have the cost due to increased instabilities. Those are the catastrophes, the nonlinearities that I talked about. And there is also, we have to take cognizance of ancillary benefits associated with climate change, like the reduction in sulfur dioxide emissions. But I will not go into it. As economists like to do, we'll try to put these costs and benefits on a benefit-cost analysis. And economists like to use graphs. But since our fellow natural scientists have done it before me, I don't feel isolated. So we'll try the first graph that you see here. I'm sorry, it's a late hour, but it's very simple. This is the cost of prevention, the CP. That's one element of the cost that I mentioned before. As you see, as we reduce emission, as we go from right to left, the costs go up in a nonlinear fashion. This is what we have expected to see. On the other hand, we have the cost of adaptation and damage. I combine it here, and I will not go into the niceties about this curve, but anyhow, what it shows that as emissions go up, the cost of damage, that means the damage associated with impacts, and also the need to adapt, they go up also in a nonlinear fashion. And what we want to do in this two-edged situation to strike a balance. And the balance, we have first to look at the total cost, which is the sum of these elements, prevention, adaptation, and damage. And this is in this upper green curve. And you want to find out the point where this curve is lowest. In other words, where the resources of the economy, which were scarce, human resources, energy resources, financial resources, what have you, are the lowest in order to reach a balance between these two edges of the sword. This is what I would call, economists would call optimal emission levels. What we see here, and we have to understand it, it's not zero emissions. We would have liked to see zero emissions. I don't believe, as an economist, as a social scientist, that we will able to reach, because of the politics of it, and because Danny talked about all the problems, and also because of the economic realities, because we have other important needs for this generation and for future generations, health, education, what have you. We cannot spend all our resources in alleviating climate change. So we will have to strike a balance. And these are the benefits and costs that I was talking about and how you measure them. The question is how, or just numbers, okay. I'll go so because this is economics. The cost that I'm talking about, the damages, we are talking about something like $14.93 per ton of carbon emission. That's, you have to convert it to carbon dioxide. We are talking about something around $50 as the most probable case. Now, if you multiply times all the amount of carbon that will be emitted over the years, and then you come at huge numbers, and you see this is something between 0, it can be 0, but it's between 1 and 3 of global annual GDP. Now, global annual GDP is 3%. If we think that the overall natural growth of the economies of the world is somewhere between 2 and 4%, that means that we are talking about a world where the standard of living will remain almost constant, if we want to avoid these things from happening. Again, it's not a free lunch. And of course, to add that, we have to add the cost of extreme weather. And for example, in a recent Stern report from the UK, the annual flood losses could increase from 0.1 to 0.2, 0.4% of GDP, doubling or quadrupling over the present case. Heat waves, just to give another example, the ones in 2003 in Europe, 35,000 people dead and $15 billion of agricultural losses. This could become commonplace in the future. And to that, we have to add non-market impacts, health impacts, and things of that sort, climate feedbacks, and unequal burden falling on different countries, poor and rich. If we continue with the business as usual, that means not doing anything, we can expect, that's again one part of the sword, 20% reduction in per capita consumption now and into the future. This is a very, very huge loss if we don't do anything in terms of economics. On the other hand, this is the damage. I told you I'd say a word about how much it will cost us. Now, based on global energy models, the cost could be between 0.2 to 2%. You remember the damage could be reached something like 3% of GDP, world GDP. So it looks like probably that the cost is going to be less than the benefits of going over and adapting these policies. Now, I'm mentioning it, I don't have time to go into it, because if we use mechanisms like tradable permits, what we have, I think you mentioned the CDI and CDM and things of that sort. We have the beginnings of this in Europe, the carbon markets and things of that sort. We can reduce appreciably the burden, the economic burden of mitigating costs. Now, Yeshayahu, I will say, you will allow me now to the regional level, just one slide, because this is very important. Because, look, I mean, we'll have to get into line and do what other countries are doing with respect to greenhouse gas emissions. We are not alone in the world. We will have to join the Kyoto Protocol processes, so whatever will come after Kyoto. But our emissions are a minuscule percentage of the total emissions of the world, and what is causing greenhouse gas emissions is what everybody is emitting, not just what Israel, and especially the United States, the evolving economies like China and India. What we should concentrate in this region, so a cost-benefit analysis, like I showed before, is irrelevant for Israel. What is important is adaptation. We in this country must pay attention, and not enough, not only in Israel, but also in other countries, they have not paid much attention to the question of adaptation. Climate change is going to occur. Whether it's very severe, or less severe, or whatever, we will have to find ways and means of overcoming, or at least reducing, or mitigating, or minimizing the impact. And this is where being proactive can be very helpful. And this is, I think, for our policymakers, this is the very important lessons. With this, the additional cost of making new infrastructures, for example, and buildings resilient to climate change in OECD countries could amount to $50 to $150 billion annually, between 0.5 and 0.5% of GDP. Again, this is not going to be a small amount. But we cannot and should not leave it to our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to carry the burden. We must do it now, and here I want to echo what Marcelo said. This is where we can do and where we should do things. Now, this is not what I want to show you. This is a situation where we are. So, here you come on this road. So, consolation is that 174 kilometers from here, there is a emergency telephone. We need the emergency telephone here and now, not 174 kilometers from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to make one comment before we move on to the next speaker, and that is that European countries are going well already on the road to adaptation, in the sense that Israel is involved with other 18 European countries, from Russia to Finland and England also, on national programs of adaptation to climate change, which range from several million euros to several million euros over periods of between 3 or 4 years to 15 years. The range is all there. And I think it's significant that Israel is in a position that it cooperates very closely with this endeavor. And with this, we move to the next speaker. Mr. Samsa, is he here? Okay. We'll be talking just a minute, and then I'll know what you'll be talking about. I'll be talking about why global warming gets a cold shoulder from the media. And Mr. Sayers from the Jerusalem Post in Israel.
Good evening. I want to give you good news, first of all. I don't have charts. I don't have graphs. I'm not talking about geopolitical instability or climate feedbacks, which are all very interesting. The point is, I am a layman, a news editor and features writer at the Jerusalem Post. I have a layman's approach to this issue and a layman's question. Where's the sex in all of this? I'm not kidding. This is not just the entertainment at the end of the conference. The thing is, as a newsman, I read news and I write news and I shape the way news is presented, and the fact is, news is saturated with sex. And if you just think about the news here lately, you'll think of Chaim Ramon's roving tongue. You'll think of the accusations against the president, or the fact that Britney Spears went out without her underwear on. Even the story of declaring Viagra kosher for Passover is a big story. So when it comes to the media in this country, it's easy to sell sex. The point is, it's hard to sell chlorofluorocarbons. It's even hard to say chlorofluorocarbons, but fortunately I practiced at home. Look, to sell newspapers, make ratings, we need to grab your attention. Hopefully like I've just done. Right? People pay attention to things that interest them. It isn't difficult to figure out that sex interests people a whole lot more than science does. If you just try this when you get home, open Google or whatever search engine you use, and enter global warming. You'll get 25 million results. That's a respectable figure. Now, if you have a good firewall, what you do is do a search for sex. You get 407 million results. People are looking a lot more for sex than they are for science. So if you were producing the news, which one would you focus on? What I want to do here in the next couple of minutes is just not to really discuss the prevalence of sex in popular culture. That's not what I'm here about. I'm trying to help you understand that there's a method to the madness behind the way the news is created and presented to you. And hopefully by understanding that, you'll have a better approach of how global warming is presented, climate change, all the scientific issues that are presented in the news. So let's take a look at why global warming gets a cold shoulder from the media. I think my writing coach 15 years ago put it best when he explained that every story, right, needs a breath of life in it. And to breathe that life in it needs CPR. Not the CPR that you're thinking of with the doll and things like that and getting help. It's conflict, people, and relevance. It's a simple formula that whether they realize it or not, all good writers and editors are using when they put a story together. And conflict is the #1 concern for a story. That might sound surprising, but just consider an old adage that you already know. Dog bites man is not a story. There's no conflict there. It happens all the time. Man bites dog, that's a whopper. All right? Conflict is not just about a physical battle between two or more forces. It can be a contrast between what you expect and what is actually happening. All right? If I tell you something you already know or expect, you probably won't bother to read my story, and that's a problem for me because I won't make a living. All right? Some kind of conflict in this story is going to grab your attention. I need to introduce some element of surprise, anger, fear. I need to create a sensation within you of conflict by telling you something that you thought was good is or is about to be bad. Even if it's a fairly mild kind of conflict like government reneges on tax cuts pledge, where the renegotiation, the backtracking is the opposite of what you expected before, hopefully in a story that said the government's going to give us all our money back. Right? Or I need to resolve a conflict that you've been expecting by telling you that some incendiary situation has been brought back from the brink, like a massive strike averted in last-minute compromise. I can tell you how the tensions mounted in that story, then I can tell you how they were resolved. All right? And that's a pretty good plot. And conflict can even be a positive story, such as miracle cure saves 8-year-old cancer patient from certain death. Okay? Now, unless you're a really cold-hearted creature, you'll probably want to learn how the girl whose cherubic little face has been all over the news for the past several days, and stories about her imminent demise. And you want to learn how she was spared from doom by the generosity of her community and the genius of her doctors, etc. Because catharsis is just the flip side of conflict. Either side of that will do. Moving on to people, the thing is, if I tell you there is a conflict going on, it's not exciting enough. You don't care about that. We need a protagonist, we need an antagonist to embody the conflict. We need a good guy and a bad guy to root for and against. Here, too, this term we can understand in the abstract. People can be a group of people. It can be a nation. It can be a corporation. It can even be beetles versus bunnies, if you want, or forces of nature, as in the case of global warming. What matters is that the reader, that you, have an object on which to focus, which can be presented as having a will against this other force, which also has a will, and they're a conflict. So you need to see a cast of characters, and you need to be able to relate to those characters. Right? So you have conflict and you have people, but there's another piece of the puzzle, and that's relevancy. All right? The more, the better. Right? If you consider the slaughtering going on in Darfur, it's a terrible story, right? Terrible. But there's conflict and there's people, but it's not getting the kind of traction that it really should get. Right? And that's sad. It's a fact of life. And the fact is that in Darfur, they don't really care much about the terrorism going on in Israel, because it's not as relevant to them as what's going on for them. It's a sliding scale, this relevance. And some are more relevant than others. I don't have stock in Microsoft, so when there's an article about Microsoft's earnings for the last quarter, I don't really pay that much attention to it. But if you have stock in Microsoft, right, you'll probably spend a lot more time investigating their financial performance. So conflict, people, and relevance are all part of a story. It's what you want if you want the media to pick on global warming stories. Imagine a story about fire, this chemical reaction that converts matter into gas in a destructive and often dangerous way. It's a pretty boring story. If we add conflict, fire destroys homes. We're getting a little bit better, but it's still not interesting enough. So we add people to the mix, and we say fire has destroyed the homes of 12 families. We get a little more interesting, and we need relevance. Fire has destroyed the homes of 12 families in your neighborhood. Okay, now if we add immediacy, we get a raging gas fire has destroyed the homes of 12 families in your neighborhood in the past 4 hours, and your house is next. There's a story. All right, so how does global warming stack up on this CPR scale? All right. Well, it has conflict. I mean, you don't get much more conflict than a global catastrophe. Right? It has people. People causing the problems, people who will suffer from the problems. And the relevance is that everyone will suffer. So at first glance, it might seem that global warming is way high on the CPR scale and has all the elements it needs for a good story. We should be talking about it every day. The truth is, there are some downsides as well. In terms of conflict, there might be too much conflict. There's conflict in the scientific community itself over the severity of the situation, over the precise cause of the situation, over the way out of the situation. There's conflict in the fact that people know that scientists for years have been predicting one catastrophe or another, and we're still here. And people are confused enough over whether carbs are good for them or bad for them. Right? It's much easier to be confused about global warming. If only a couple of decades ago we were told that the world was getting too cold. Now it's too hot. An Indian scientist wrote last week a very telling passage. He said, "I've long been an agnostic on global warming because the evidence is ambiguous. But I almost became a convert when Greenpeace publicized photos showing the disastrously rapid retreat of the Upsala Glacier in Argentina. How disastrous, I thought, if this was the coming fate of all glaciers. Then last Christmas, I went on vacation to Lake Argentina. The Upsala Glacier and 6 other glaciers descend from the South Andean ice field into the lake. I was astounded to discover that while the Upsala Glacier had receded rapidly, the other glaciers showed little movement, and one had advanced across the lake into the Magellan Peninsula. From the same ice field," he said, "another major glacier spilling into the Chile has grown 60% in volume." So what did he learn? He said, if in the same area some glaciers advance and others retreat, the cause is clearly not global warming, but local micro-conditions. So this is an argument that's raging in the scientific community, right? And the average layman like myself says, I can't figure it out. I'm going to wait until the sky crashes in, and in the meantime, I'm going to keep going on the way I am. So it's a major challenge to anybody who wants to mobilize the media, anybody else on climate change. We also have a problem that climate change is both literally and figuratively over our heads, right? The average newsreader or viewer doesn't appreciate the significance of spore samples and parts per billion of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. All he or she knows is that the sun is still yellow, the sky is still blue. Even on the issue of people, global warming falls down a bit because almost all the data on the subject are being collected in an ocean or in the air, not in our living rooms. They're being studied on the level of molecules or in tiny creatures that 99% of people never see. It's not like when we talk about dioxins in your neighborhood or something like that. It's a faraway problem that people have a hard time connecting to it. There's even a problem, though, with climate change's relevance. The fact that it's so relevant, it kind of becomes irrelevant. What do I mean by that? I mean that the whole world is to blame, so what can I do? Right? What difference does it make if I stop driving my SUV? There's still going to be all these greenhouse gases. The scale is just too big. This is a difficulty in overcoming apathy on the issue. But it's also a problem of immediacy. Right? If you tell someone that global warming will dramatically affect life as we know it on this planet but maybe only in a couple hundred years, he'll probably shrug and go on with his lunch. As it is, people know that cigarettes will shorten their life, but they keep puffing away. I think, too, that most people share an inherent sense that humans, no matter how hard they try, just can't possibly destroy the Earth. We all know that people screw things up all the time, but this is the Earth we're talking about. Whether you believe in God or in nature, you have a feeling that the world and everything in it is just too big to be knocked off kilter by a few hairless apes. It's just, there's kind of an internal feeling that it's going to work out in the end. So if I were to switch for a minute to the role of media advisor for the global warming lobby, I want to make a couple of suggestions about how to make this story more interesting to the media and to the people who use it, basically everybody. Firstly, I try to recognize that Israel has so many immediate dangers that global warming is pretty low on the list of people's priorities. I mean, we have a war in the north, we have a war in the south, we have an Iranian madman telling you he's going to wipe us off the map. So for the media also, this story is going to be lower down on a list of priorities. A little carbon in the breeze isn't going to faze us. The second thing I would say is to scale back the level of alarm and make climate change a community issue, a quality of life issue, not a life or death issue. In principle, people care about the environment. In practice, though, they're much more likely to act if they can do something for their own community. You see this all the time. Rematks is down there in the desert, and it's terrible, but it's not in your neighborhood, so it's okay to you that it's down there. If it were in your neighborhood, you have tremendous activity, and you move it, but it's down there, I can't see it. I don't worry about it. Do you know where your trash is now? It goes out on a barge somewhere into a country that you never see. It doesn't bother you. But when it's right outside your door and they don't collect it, it's a big story all over the country. So we need to make this story a community story. Speaking as a reader rather than a writer for a minute, I'd be much more inclined to read a story about the effect of industrial pollution on air quality in my town than the effect of industrial pollution on the atmosphere over Antarctica. I'd also focus on financial incentives to Earth-friendly changes rather than the dire consequences of doing nothing. If you tell people they're going to destroy the world by driving to work, it's not going to attract them to your cause. But if you point out that they can take a cruise to the Greek islands every year with the money they save on driving a higher fuel efficiency car, they might start paying attention. Even with all that, though, I have to say that making global warming the top news story of the day is going to be difficult. Unless, of course, it becomes so hot out that Britney Spears walks around with that underwear all the time. And without a fancy PowerPoint presentation, that is basically the nutshell of the issue. I don't know if we're moving to questions now. Or...
Well, thank you very much. I think unless there is some urgent question, it's pretty late already, and we have one question. Well, Prof?
As far as I understood from your lecture, neoclassical environmental economists predict that the cost of dealing with global warming will be less than 0.5%.
I'm sorry again?
That as far as I understood from your lecture, I understood that you said that the neoclassical environmental economists predict that the cost of dealing with global warming will be less than 0.5%. But 0.4.
One question, this is the word neoclassical. I use other, I don't care whether it's neoclassical or whatever. It's between 1.5 and 2%. GDP, world GDP.
In 1998, maybe 97, I don't remember the exact year, Professor Constanza.
We need to understand, and sorry to interrupt, but we really need to
We need the time.
some time for the concluding remarks, and we can afterwards, I'm sure, approach Professor Shechter again.
I'd like to thank the speakers very much, and I'd like to also thank very much Dr. Eli Galanti, who was very much involved in organizing this workshop. And the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yeshayahu. So on behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to welcome you and thank you for coming here. And I'd like to invite Professor Paul Crutzen to say his concluding remarks for this conference, please.
Now,
Oh,
now it's on.
well, I had not expected that I should be sort of summarizing this conference, but what to say? I mean, it has been very informative, and I think we should have had a little more time for discussion. In fact, I was thinking of if there are some burning questions. We have a quarter of an hour sort of set aside. If there are, I would like to know. I mean, it's not often you get together with such a group. That happens once. Sorry? Yeah, maybe we can do it so that some of the time I'm here, it's actually used by you and for asking questions. So please go ahead. Can you speak up maybe?
Yes, if you want to, the question was, what do I mean by reducing the standard of living if we attempt or begin some real action in trying to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and other things like adaptations, something of that sort? Certainly. I mean, these things require resources. I mean, if you want to reduce greenhouse gases, I'm sure that Professor Crutzen will be much better, will give you a much better answer. For example, changing the mix of fuels, increasing the price of fossil-based fuel, which means that you will be able to spend less on transportation, on fuel, on heating, or whatever you, or else if you spend the same, you'll have less money to spend on other things being equal, given your income level. So you will have to learn to do with a reduced standard of living. You'll have to cut somewhere. People will do it according to their preferences. Some people will spend less on tourism, some people less on education, some people less on health. But this is the meaning of a reduction in the level of in the standard of living, or quality of life, or what have you.
But the question is related to that is, when the standard of living in China and India goes up, what will be the influence of that on our economy? Will we gain or lose from a development of that kind? You have an answer?
So, you know, this is a completely false way of looking at it, unfortunately, and this is the economic way, the classical economic way, but the more you invest in finding new technology, let's say if it was a matter of reducing pollution or getting rid of the amount of money it would take to get rid of carbon dioxide would be huge, but what does it mean huge money? You're hiring people to do it. That adds to the global, to the GDP. The more you invest, the more you're adding to the GDP. The more we invest in terms of the globe, in terms of the whole world, the more we invest in improving our environment in all sorts of ways, the more we have to have people working. You'll have more jobs, more everything. Every time there's a hurricane in a place and there's all this devastation, everything goes up. Everybody gets rich because you have to rebuild. Everybody is rebuilding. So everybody's making more money. And it increases all of these things. So people, this classical idea, you pay more for gas, it's not a matter of that. There'll be more people producing and growing alcohols or whatever they're doing. I don't know if alcohol is a good solution to the problem. There's a lot of people who say it's shit. But anyway, I'm just saying that investment is adding to the gross national product of all of those things.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that it is necessarily good for the environment.
But it's good for the it's good economically for our standard of living, which I don't know if that's.
But in the cost or the benefits, I would like to add also, the benefits of our action is not only restricted to the global change issue, the global warming issue, because there are many other things where our standard of living will go up. Firstly, we save the fossil fuels for coming generations if we lower our outtake at the moment as soon as possible. And the change, there's many side effects, which I really wonder whether the economists have taken those into account, which are going into the direction of greater benefits, like there may be less ozone in the troposphere, the air pollution may have lessened.
I mentioned that.
Yeah.
And similar benefits.
Yeah. So these are important factors. So I also think that climate change has been a little too much in the attention. Global warming is important, but there's so many other things which are happening to the environment, which sort of buried at the moment about this global warming syndrome, and which I think may actually be more important.
For example,
Example of what?
other things.
Oh, yeah, health effects, and you know, better environment, more ways of getting outdoors. I mean, do we have to drive the car so much? If you instead take a bike, it's better for your health. So our attitude to all of this has to change quite a lot.
But we are now talking more and more about global change, not just merely climate change. Climate change is subsumed in global change. Global change includes all the other things that you...
Yeah, but on the whole, when nowadays people talk about it in the press, it's global warming. It's not so much global change. So I think this should be rectified, and also by the press, this should more come to the forefront. So.
Sorry, we just discussed before some topics. I am a medical doctor and scientist involved actually in genomics and the post-genomics area. Thank you for your lecture, Professor Levin, that you are on the clouds and I am on Earth. And we are seeing patients. What is strange, I was participating in a workshop in the World Health Organization 3 months ago, and we are facing new aspects of disease that we are attributing to two major aspects of environmental damage. One is the global warming, and the second, as I told you, is the night pollution in our 24-hour modern society. We are making a network to discuss policies and health policies because we are endangering not only economy, but we are endangering human beings, male and female. And we are studying actually on genome variation on genes, clustering the genes about what we are expecting in the 50 or 100 years coming, to establish database about what are doing environmental changes, both that they are very important today, the global warming and the night-by-night pollution, shift workers, and so on.
Okay. Maybe you can keep it short.
Just closing, the face of the disease. This is going to the lecture of Professor Shechter. It will be a tremendous change in health, economy, and policy, because what we see today is resistant disease. Example, malaria for the 10 years.
I'm sorry, I'll have to cut you down. I'm sorry, we have no time for opinions. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Any
Maybe we
questions?
can have 2 more questions and then.
Please, I think you just.
I have a question to Dani Rabinowitz. He started with an issue that the impact already of global warming on the financial industry. So I would like to find what actually the insurance company are doing now and the banking in the world as a result of global warming phenomena which taking place the last year. And because of Katrina situation and the tsunami in Asia, and we know one of the major insurance banks almost went bankrupt, so maybe you can elaborate.
They're mainly dealing it on the retail side of insurance. So, for example, in 2006, 600,000 patients were for home insurance on the eastern side of the United States were denied in 2006 because they were deemed by the insurers to be in areas that are in an era of global warming are under threat. On the whole, we're talking about an area where home properties are at a value of $7.2 trillion. So, of course, not all of it is uninsurable. But out of this property, 600,000 to be denied in 1 year is unprecedented, and it's explicitly explained by the insurance companies that it is on the background of global warming. That's one thing they do. Another thing they do is that they use their economic and retail power in order to give incentives to people to go green. For example, lowering insurance premiums on hybrid cars. And the third thing they do is that they give warnings. They do analysis, and then they issue warnings or communicate to their clients warnings about their investments. Maybe you're investing in a company that either causes global warming or could be regulated and sued. Now, these are nice things, but as far as I'm concerned, they're not even coming closer to grabbing the bull by its horns. It's a good thing for them and for the clients that they're thinking in these directions, but the real problem that I was putting forward is that the world, on a macro level, future commodities, future crops, large-scale real estate is becoming uninsurable. And there may be a moment in the future, and it is very difficult to predict when this moment will come, in which this realization would become a financial, economic, insurance reality, which would have repercussions that really are beyond our imagination. And I think what they're doing now is sort of freezing where they are, without actually acknowledging it, because I alluded to it at the end of my talk. Even acknowledging it could bring the house down on them. They're in a very, very difficult position.
I disagree with you about this, because I think the financial, I'm not talking about just the warming effect, but on the environmental protection. Financial insecurity. For example, the banking industry, some of the banks have signed or joined what they call the Equator Principle, that they don't grant loans to organizations that are not preserving the environment. Insurance companies, for example, AIG, some 20 or 5 years ago, started the super fund idea of cleaning the world. And they put a huge fund for that because they suffered tremendous losses. Even in Israel, just recently, there was a court case of Mifalim Electrochimim in Haifa, which went bankrupt, and the banks the court decided that the banks that granted loans to this industry, the banks have to pay the money, huge amounts for the cleanup.
So far, there's no disagreement between us. I'm just saying that part of all this, there's also the big picture of the huge, unprecedented, unimaginable risks of global warming, which I don't think any of the central financial organizations are capable of dealing with. What you're saying, and I know other examples, are very good examples. They are steps in the right direction. But I think that the magnitude of the problem is immense.
And I'm afraid we'll have to stop here because it's already late, and I'd like to give Professor Crutzen to say some final words.
Yeah, thank you. It has been a real pleasure to have been here and to experience the attention given to the subject. And I'm a little more optimistic than the journalist from the Jerusalem Post, because I don't know where he's sitting, but okay. Last night I couldn't participate, but the movie by Al Gore was shown, and it was I understand it was so full in the lecture hall that people were sitting on the doors, on the steps and many people actually couldn't participate. They had simply to go home because they were not allowed to sit there because of fire danger. So I think the young people are very strongly interested in these things. And after all, they are the intelligentsia of the future. So I'm not that pessimistic. I think we are reaching somewhere. And I'm very happy to have been here and to have seen old friends. They'll still be around until Monday. So I enjoy very much having been here. Thank you.